Have you ever found yourself in this situation? I just don't know which nut to eat. Okay, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But I don't like pistachio. Okay, you probably haven't because that was a little bit weird, but just in case you have, in this video I'm going to be running through the most popular types of nuts and kind of ranking them based on a few categories. It's going to be extremely arbitrary and a bit vague, but maybe it will help with your nut decision anxiety, but I'll throw in some fun facts on the way as well. But anyway, let's get cracking. Nish here, and my first scoring category, you won't be surprised if you've seen anything else on this channel, it is nutrition, possibly the most important category. I've got a whole load of numbers here, they represent nutritional values per 100 gram. I'm not going to go through every single number, but I'll kind of highlight what's important. So first off, calories you'll see are very high for nuts, you know, they're very nutrient rich. And to be honest, I'm not too fussed about an extra 50 or 100 calories here or there, I wouldn't really judge them based on that. The next nutrient, however, is fat. And to make things a bit easier to digest, I've split it just into unsaturated and saturated. Now you can go further with unsaturated with poly and monos, but to my understanding with nuts, it doesn't matter too much. But right, where was I? Okay, so saturated and unsaturated fat. Saturated fat is generally thought not to be so great. It's kind of linked to higher kind of levels of bad cholesterol. That's probably not the full story, but I'm just kind of going by what I've read on kind of the NHS guidelines. So let's just say that lots of saturated fat isn't so great. Based on that information, we see the almond comes out on top in terms of the lowest saturated fat, while the cashew has the highest at 8 grams. The rest are kind of around the same kind of ballpark. Next up is carbs, and I'm not too fussed about the presence of carbs here unless you're kind of like on a keto diet or something. It is interesting that cashews have way more carbs than any of the other nuts, and I found that quite interesting. I had to like check a couple sources just to make sure my numbers were right. It has 30 grams per 100 gram. The rest are pretty low, as nuts are generally thought to be low in carbohydrates. But in general, I'm not really marking up or marking down based on this because I don't think it's a problem to have a few more grams of carbs. One of the most important nutrients is protein, and this is particularly good in nuts for people who are vegan and vegetarian. We see that almond and peanut come on top with 29 and 26% protein by weight respectively. I'm a little bit disappointed by the 15 grams in the walnut and hazelnut. I think they're underperforming there, and you know, they're just slacking, aren't they? I'm not really sure if it's possible for a nut to slack, but yeah, I'll keep that in. The last thing we have is fiber, and fiber is a really good nutrient for your body, keeps your bowels working well, I think. And all of them are decent, apart from cashews, which only have 3 grams, which is still something, but it's just not as good as the other nuts, which are all around kind of the 6-7 gram mark. So with all those nutrients kind of compiled, here are the scores that I've got from the nuts. You can see the almond comes out on top, with peanuts coming second. So our next category is going to be a tricky one, certainly maybe a controversial one, and that is taste. I am, of course, an authority on this subject, so I'm just going to use my opinions and kind of use the scores based on that. So first up is the Arachis hypergaea. Oh, sorry, I switched to Latin. That's the peanut. I think peanuts are pretty nice tasting. They're certainly maybe the most popular nut, so there's got to be a reason for that. I think it's a pretty palatable nut taste, and not too much more to say about that, I guess. As for the Anacardium occidentale, or the cashew, I'm a really big fan. I think they're very creamy and sweet. I think maybe the carbs we just talked about kind of contribute to that flavor, but definitely out of these, I'd say they're my most favorite nut. I do want to take a moment just to talk about how weird the cultivating and growing of cashews is. So the cashew nut grows kind of out of the cashew apple fruit, which kind of looks like this. So they kind of grow this entire fruit just to take the nut at the bottom. And the nut is in a shell. And another side note, this is actually the characteristic of what makes a nut a nut. It has to kind of be inside a shell. But it gets interesting with cashews and the shell, because when you crack open the shell, you have this stuff called anacardic acid. Is that anacardic? You have this stuff called anacardic acid, which is the same stuff you find in poison ivy. And basically when you crack open the shell, you could have this acid stuff that could blister you and damage your skin. So I hope when people are cultivating it, they're doing it by machine and not by hand. Moving on to the Prunus dolphus, or almond. Again, a really solid nut, I'd say, you know, probably just below peanuts maybe in terms of my taste hierarchy, but I definitely rate a good almond, but I'm not a fan of marzipan. Onto the genus Corylus, or hazelnut. I think this is an interesting one because I hadn't actually eaten any hazelnuts until quite recently, and in the past my only exposure to hazelnut was like Nutella or hazelnut-based spreads, and it turns out that Nutella is actually 54% sugar and 12% hazelnut, so it probably isn't a good indicator of what hazelnuts actually taste like, and I find hazelnuts quite bitter. I don't know if it's just the skin or the nut itself, but they kind of have a bitterness to them, and it's the same thing with walnuts or Juglans regia. And I think, again, the bitterness is kind of in the kind of skin kind of bit, so maybe you can't really take that off, can you? But yeah, generally they just have quite a mild taste and nothing really noteworthy. So yeah, hazelnut and walnut get kind of low points for me. The last one, the pistachio, of course, has quite a distinct taste. It's popular for kind of ice creams. I think it's quite good. I think for me it's kind of on par with peanut, but it doesn't beat out the cashew. So based on all that kind of arbitrary information, here are my taste scores. Feel free to argue with me down in the comments if you like, but you know, I'm not going to change them. My third and final category is going to be environmental impact, which is an interesting one that I hadn't read into much before. I basically found this blog post which is comparing the water required to cultivate the various nuts. Now granted, this is made by a seed company that wants to sell you seeds because they're better, but they do take numbers out of kind of a scientific paper, so I think it's kind of reliable. Basically, some of these nuts take an extremely large amount of water to grow, and this is bad, and the article specifically refers to California. When so much water is used to cultivate these crops, it kind of diverts it from natural rivers and streams and can affect like salmon populations and things. As you can see with this graph, basically almonds and pistachios are awful, and I'm not sure why those two specifically are really bad, but it's so high. For example, almond milk, it takes 6,000 liters of water to make 1 liter of almond milk, which is kind of nuts. Oh god, I did it again, didn't I? We can also see that peanuts are really low compared to the other nuts, and I did a little bit of digging. This is a good one, because peanuts are actually grown in the ground rather than being grown on trees like some of the other nuts. So maybe, you know, my instinct is maybe you can kind of get more peanuts per area of land, whereas trees you kind of have to spread them about or something. So peanuts score really well in this category. Meanwhile, almonds and pistachios are going to score really badly in this category, as you can see by the scores here. Hazelnuts and walnuts, again, are kind of in the middle. They're not great, but they're not quite as bad as some of the others. Right, so that is all 3 of my arbitrary categories done. Here are our final scores. So we have peanut coming out on top, cashew second, and almond third. Peanuts, to be honest, should even get bonus points for being the absolute cheapest nut in this list. I swear they're like half or a third of the price of all the others. You can see that almond had really good nutrition, but it was kind of let down by the environmental impact, while cashews, again, they have good taste, but they're let down by their nutrition a little bit. So do let me know what your kind of order of these nuts would be in the comments. Like and subscribe to see more kind of food related content. I do also have a tech review channel where the videos are less pun riddled, so do check that out if you're interested. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.